All right, what are you two doing out here, and what's in the bag?
Sitting in the park, man, not bothering anybody.
Yeah, well, I asked what's in the bag. Go ahead and tell me.
It's not your business.
It is. Now, you see this taser in one hand, cuffs in the other? Last chance, give me the bag.
You haven't done anything. You can't just...
Officer Ryan Caldwell, a rookie cop with 8 months on the force and a pattern of making arrests without probable cause, was patrolling Riverside Park when he saw two black men sitting on a bench minding their own business. And despite having no legal reason to approach them, Caldwell watched them for 15 minutes waiting for them to do something suspicious. Then, when a third black man walked up, handed one of them a bag without speaking and walked away, Caldwell decided that was all the evidence he needed and stomped over to the bench, accused them of being up to no good, and demanded they hand over the bag immediately because he was certain they were dealing drugs or committing a crime in public. When the two men, FBI Special Agents Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles, told them they had committed no crime and refused to consent to a search without a warrant, Caldwell raised his voice, threatened to use force, pulled out his taser, and told them they were under arrest for resisting an officer. What Caldwell didn't know was that the two men he was threatening were undercover FBI agents on an active operation, that he had just threatened to taser two undercover federal agents, that his entire racist tirade had been recorded, and that his decision to profile and threaten federal agents would cost him his badge, trigger a department-wide investigation, and result in a lawsuit that would cost the city nearly $1 million. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe two black men should be able to sit on a park bench without being profiled by a cop, like this video and subscribe. Riverside Park on a Thursday afternoon in late April was exactly what a public park was supposed to be. Families with kids on the playground, joggers on the paths, people sitting on benches reading or talking on their phones, dogs running off leash in the designated area. The kind of place where people came to relax, to take a break from the noise of the city, to sit in the sun for a while and do absolutely nothing. Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles sat on a bench near the east entrance of the park, talking quietly and watching the afternoon unfold around them. Damon was 34 years old, 9 years with the FBI, currently assigned to the Organized Crime Division, working undercover operations that required him to blend into environments where looking like a federal agent would get him killed. Kelvin was 32, 7 years with the Bureau, same division, same type of work. They were both dressed in casual clothes. Jeans, hoodies, sneakers. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. They weren't just two friends catching up on a park bench. They were working. They had been running an undercover operation for the past 6 months, targeting a drug trafficking organization with ties to 3 states. And today they were waiting for a contact to deliver intelligence that would help them make arrests within the next 2 weeks. The handoff was supposed to be quick, discreet, and unremarkable. A man would walk up, hand them a bag containing documents and a burner phone, and walk away. No conversation. No attention drawn. Just two people meeting in a public park like it happened 1,000 times a day. Damon checked his watch. The contact was running 5 minutes late, but that wasn't unusual. He looked over at Kelvin, who was scrolling through his phone with the kind of relaxed posture that came from years of doing this kind of work. They had done dozens of handoffs like this before. It was routine. Boring, even. What they didn't notice immediately was the patrol car that had pulled into the parking lot 12 minutes earlier and hadn't moved since. Officer Ryan Caldwell sat in his cruiser with the engine off, his eyes locked on the bench where Damon and Kelvin were sitting. Caldwell was 26 years old with 8 months on the police force, and in those 8 months he had already built a reputation that his training officers had started to notice, but hadn't formally addressed. He was eager. Too eager. He made stops that didn't have clear justification. He arrested people on charges that didn't always hold up in court. And over those 8 months, 3 formal complaints had been filed against him by Black and Latino residents, all of them claiming he had stopped them without probable cause, questioned them aggressively, and treated them like criminals for doing nothing more than existing in public spaces. All 3 complaints had been documented. All 3 had been noted by his supervisors. And all 3 had been dismissed as the kind of thing that happens when a rookie is still learning the job. Caldwell saw Damon and Kelvin sitting on the bench, and something in his brain flagged it immediately. 2 black men, sitting alone, not doing anything obvious, but in Caldwell's mind that didn't matter. They looked like they were waiting for something. And people who sat on park benches waiting for something were usually waiting for something illegal. He watched them for 15 minutes. He watched them talk. He watched them check their phones. He watched them do absolutely nothing that would justify a stop under any legal standard. But Caldwell kept watching anyway, because in his mind it was only a matter of time before they did something that would give him the probable cause he needed. And then it happened. A third man walked into the park from the west entrance. He was also black, also dressed casually, and he walked with the kind of purposeful stride that said he was heading somewhere specific. He reached the bench where Damon and Kelvin were sitting, stopped directly in front of them, and without saying a single word, handed Damon a small black duffel bag. Damon took the bag, nodded once, and the man turned and walked away. No handshake, no conversation, no exchange of money. Just a silent handoff that lasted less than 10 seconds. To anyone watching without bias, it looked like exactly what it was. One person handing something to another person in a public park. It could have been borrowed tools. It could have been gym clothes. It could have been anything. There was no context that suggested a crime. No behavior that indicated drug activity. Nothing that would give a reasonable officer probable cause to investigate further. But Ryan Caldwell didn't see it that way. He saw two black men receiving a bag from a third black man in a park, and his brain filled in the rest. Drugs, a deal, criminal activity happening right in front of him. He had been watching them, waiting for them to slip up, and now they had given him exactly what he needed. Caldwell got out of his cruiser and started walking toward the bench. His stride was fast, purposeful, and aggressive. His hand was already resting on his belt near his equipment, and by the time he was halfway across the grass, he had already decided how this was going to go. Damon saw him coming first. He didn't say anything out loud, but his posture shifted slightly, and Kelvin picked up on it immediately. They both looked up and saw the uniformed officer walking straight toward them with an expression that said he wasn't coming over to ask for directions. Caldwell reached the bench and stopped directly in front of them, standing over them, in a way that was clearly meant to be intimidating. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask if they needed help. He just looked at both of them and said the first thing that came to his mind. "I knew your kind is always up to no good." Damon and Kelvin both looked at him, confusion and caution mixing on their faces. Damon spoke first, his voice calm and even. "Excuse me?" Caldwell's tone was sharp and accusatory. "Don't play dumb with me. I've been watching you two. I'm happy I was, because I just caught you red-handed. You had the guts to be dealing drugs or committing crimes right here in public." He pointed at the bag sitting on the bench beside Damon. "Hand over that bag right now." Damon's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a weight now that hadn't been there a moment ago. "Officer, what's the problem? We're just sitting here." Caldwell stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "Cut the act. I saw what just happened. Some guy walks up, hands you a bag, and walks away without saying a word. That's not normal. That's a drug deal. So hand over the bag, or I'm arresting both of you right now." Kelvin spoke up, his tone still calm, but firm. "We haven't committed any crime. You can't just walk up to us and start demanding things. We're sitting on a public bench. We're not bothering anyone, and you don't have probable cause." Caldwell's face hardened. "I don't need probable cause. I saw what I saw. I know what you two are up to. You think I'm stupid? Hand over the bag, or I'm taking it by force." Damon looked directly at Caldwell, and his voice stayed level. "We know our rights. What's in this bag is none of your business. We haven't committed a crime. We do not consent to a search. If you want to search us, you'll need a warrant." Caldwell's patience, which had been thin to begin with, snapped completely. He stepped even closer, looming over both of them now, his voice loud enough that people nearby were starting to turn and look. "This isn't a request. This is a command. I'm an officer of the law, and I suspect you two are committing a crime. It's my job to find out what's in that bag, so unless you want me to use force, I will see what's inside whether you like it or not. And I'm arresting you anyway. So unless you want me to add resisting to my report, you better hand over that bag right now." Damon's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "We know our rights. You're abusing them. Even as a cop, you're not above the law." He paused, then asked the question that needed to be asked. "Is this because we're black? If we were white, would you have been watching us for 15 minutes? Would you be standing here right now demanding to search us without cause?" Caldwell let out a short, bitter laugh, and whatever professionalism he might have been pretending to have disappeared completely. "That doesn't matter. All that matters is you guys are black. And after all, that's all your kind do anyway." The words hung in the air for a moment, undeniable and recorded. Kelvin's voice was quiet but sharp. "You need to walk away. Right now, before you ruin your own career. Call your supervisor." Caldwell's hand moved to his belt and he pulled out his handcuffs with one hand and his taser with the other. He held the taser up so both men could see it clearly. "Threatening a police officer is a crime. You're both under arrest. And if you resist, I will taser you, both of you. He pointed the taser directly at them. Damon and Kelvin looked at each other. They both knew this had gone too far. There was no talking their way out of this. Caldwell had already made up his mind, and he wasn't going to listen to reason. Damon spoke calmly, his hands still visible. No need for that, officer. Both men reached inside their shirts and pulled out badges hanging on chains around their necks. They held them up, so Caldwell could see them clearly. Damon, Special Agent Damon Wright, FBI. Kelvin, Special Agent Kelvin Miles, FBI. They let the badges hang in the air between them and Caldwell, and they watched his face go from confident to confused to pale in the span of about 3 seconds. Officer Ryan Caldwell stood frozen in front of the bench, with his taser still pointed at 2 federal agents, and the reality of what he had just done was starting to sink in. His face had gone pale and sweat was forming on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. He stared at the badges hanging around Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles's necks, and his mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. You should have said that from the beginning, Caldwell stammered, his voice losing all the confidence it had carried just seconds earlier. How was I supposed to know? You were acting suspicious. I was just doing my job. Damon's expression didn't change. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now that made it clear he was done being patient. Acting suspicious? We were sitting on a bench. That's not suspicious. That's existing while black, and your job isn't to watch 2 people doing nothing wrong for 15 minutes hoping they'll give you an excuse to harass them. Kelvin added, his tone just as controlled but carrying the same weight. Your job is to follow the law, not to profile people, not to threaten them, not to demand searches without probable cause, and definitely not to pull a taser on federal agents conducting an operation. Caldwell lowered the taser slightly, but he was still holding it, still trying to find some way to make this situation make sense in a way that didn't end with his career in ruins. I didn't know you were FBI. If you had just identified yourselves from the start, none of this would have happened. Damon leaned forward slightly, and his voice got quieter but somehow more forceful. We didn't have to identify ourselves. We weren't committing a crime. We were sitting on a public bench. You're the one who approached us. You're the one who made assumptions. You're the one who escalated. Kelvin reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small recording device that had been clipped to the inside of his shirt. He held it up so Caldwell could see it clearly. And just so you know, everything you said was recorded. Every word, every threat, every racist comment. Caldwell's eyes went wide. What? Damon nodded toward the device in Kelvin's hand. You said, and I quote, I knew your kind is always up to no good. You said all that matters is you guys are black, and after all, that's all your kind do. You threatened to taser us. You demanded to search materials related to a federal investigation. You violated our Fourth Amendment rights, and all of it is on tape. Caldwell's hands started shaking. He finally lowered the taser completely and clipped it back onto his belt, but his fingers fumbled with the clasp. I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to... You meant exactly what you said, Kelvin interrupted, his voice firm. You saw 2 black men sitting on a bench, and you decided we were criminals. You watched us for 15 minutes, waiting for us to do something that would justify your bias. And when you saw a simple handoff, you filled in the rest with your assumptions. Damon stood up from the bench, and Caldwell instinctively took a step back. Damon wasn't threatening him. He wasn't raising his voice, but the authority in his posture and his tone made it very clear who was in control of this situation now. Let me explain something to you, Officer Caldwell, Damon said, looking directly at him. You just threatened to taser 2 federal agents who were in the middle of an active undercover operation. That bag you demanded to see, it contains classified intelligence related to a 6-month investigation into organized crime. If you had confiscated it, if you had arrested us, if you had compromised this operation, you wouldn't just be losing your job. You'd be facing federal charges. Caldwell's voice came out weak and defensive. I was just doing my job. I didn't know... Your job, Kelvin said, standing up now as well, is not to profile people based on the color of their skin. Your job is not to make up probable cause where none exists. Your job is not to threaten people with violence because they refused an unlawful search. Damon pulled out his phone. Now, unless we're being detained, you need to clear out of our space. Immediately. Caldwell looked like he wanted to say something else, maybe apologize, maybe try one more time to explain himself, but the expressions on both agents' faces told him there was nothing he could say that would make this better. Am I being detained? Caldwell asked quietly. No, Damon said, but you will be hearing from us, and from our supervisor, and from your department's internal affairs division. Now leave." Caldwell nodded quickly, turned, and started walking back toward his patrol car. His steps were fast, almost stumbling, and his hands were still shaking as he got into the driver's seat. He sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, before finally starting the engine and pulling out of the parking lot. Damon and Kelvin sat back down on the bench and watched him drive away. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Kelvin let out a long breath and shook his head. "That was close," Kelvin said quietly. Damon nodded. "Too close. If he had actually arrested us, if he had taken this bag, the whole operation could have been blown." Kelvin looked at the recording device still in his hand. "At least we got everything on tape." Damon pulled out his phone again and dialed a number. It rang twice before a voice answered. "This is Supervisory Special Agent Harding." "Sir, it's Agent Wright. We just had an incident at the drop site. A local cop approached us, accused us of dealing drugs, threatened us with a taser, and attempted to search classified materials. We identified ourselves as FBI and he backed off. But we need to file a formal complaint. This needs to be on record." There was a pause on the other end, and then Harding's voice came back sharp and focused. "He threatened you with a taser? On an active op?" "Yes, sir. And he made it very clear that he was targeting us because we're black. We have the entire interaction recorded." "Send me the recording immediately, and file a complaint with his department. I want this documented at every level." "What's his name?" "Officer Ryan Caldwell. Patrol officer. Looks like a rookie." "I'll handle it from here. Are you compromised?" "No, sir. The operation is still intact. We have the materials." "Good. Finish the op, but I want that complaint filed today." Damon ended the call and looked at Kelvin. "Harding's pissed." "He should be," Kelvin said. "We almost got arrested by a racist rookie cop on a federal operation." Damon stood up, picked up the black duffel bag and slung it over his shoulder. "Let's get this back to the office, and then we're filing that complaint." They walked him out of Riverside Park together, and by the time they reached their car, Damon had already started drafting the formal complaint in his head. Officer Ryan Caldwell's 8-month career was about to come to an end. Damon Wrighton and Kelvin Miles walked into the FBI field office 2 hours after the incident at Riverside Park, and the first thing they did was go straight to Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Harding's office. Harding was already waiting for them, sitting behind his desk with his arms crossed and an expression on his face that said he had spent the last 2 hours getting angrier with every minute that passed. "Close the door," Harding said as soon as they walked in. Damon closed it behind them, and both agents sat down in the chairs across from Harding's desk. Kelvin pulled out the recording device and placed it on the desk between them. Harding looked at it for a moment, then looked up at both of them. "Walk me through it. Everything." Damon started from the beginning. He explained that they had been sitting on the bench waiting for the contact to arrive for the scheduled handoff. He explained that they had noticed a patrol car in the parking lot but hadn't thought much of it because cops drove it through the park all the time. He explained that the contact had arrived, handed them the bag containing the intelligence documents and the burner phone, and left without incident. And then he explained that Officer Ryan Caldwell had approached them within seconds of the handoff, accused them of dealing drugs, and demanded they hand over the bag. Kelvin picked up from there. He explained that they had told Caldwell they hadn't committed any crime, that they had refused to consent to a search, and that Caldwell had escalated immediately. He explained that Caldwell had raised his voice, threatened to use force, and pulled out his taser. He explained that Caldwell had made it explicitly clear that he was targeting them because they were black. Harding listened without interrupting. When they finished, he reached for the recording device and pressed play. The recording started with Caldwell's voice, loud and aggressive. "I knew your kind is always up to no good." Harding's jaw tightened. The recording continued. Damon's voice, calm and questioning. "Excuse me?" Caldwell's response, accusatory and certain. "Don't play dumb with me. I've been watching you two. I just caught you red-handed." Harding leaned forward, his eyes locked on the device. The conversation played out in full. Caldwell demanding the bag. Damon and Kelvin refusing. Caldwell escalating. The moment when Damon asked if this was because they were black, and then Caldwell's response, clear and undeniable. "That doesn't matter. All that matters is you guys are black. And after all, that's all your kind do anyway." Harding's hand curled into a fist on the desk. The recording continued to the moment when Caldwell pulled out his taser and threatened to use it. The moment when Damon and Kelvin identified themselves as FBI agents. The stammering, defensive backtracking from Caldwell after he realized what he had done. When the recording ended, Harding sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he looked back at Damon and Kelvin. He threatened to taser 2 federal agents on an active undercover operation because he saw 2 black men sitting on a bench and decided they were criminals, Harding said slowly, his voice tight with controlled anger. And he admitted on tape that he was profiling you based on race. Damon nodded. Yes, sir. Harding picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang once before someone picked up. This is Supervisory Special Agent Marcus Harding, FBI. I need to speak with Chief Howard. It's urgent. There was a pause, and then Harding was transferred. A moment later, a voice came through the speaker. This is Chief Howard. Chief, this is SSA Harding with the FBI. 2 of my agents were conducting an undercover operation in Riverside Park this afternoon when one of your officers approached them, racially profiled them, threatened them with a taser, and attempted to search classified federal materials. I'm filing a formal complaint and I'm requesting an immediate internal affairs investigation. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Chief Howard's voice came back, carefully controlled. Can you give me the officer's name? Ryan Caldwell. Another pause. I'll open the investigation immediately. Can you send me documentation? I'm sending you a recording of the entire interaction. It's all on tape, every word. Harding ended the call and looked back at Damon and Kelvin. You 2 need to file formal written statements, include every detail, timeline, exact quotes, everything. They both nodded. Harding leaned forward, his voice dropping to something quieter, but harder. This isn't just about what happened to you 2 today. This is about what this officer has been doing to people who don't have FBI badges to pull out. If he's comfortable profiling and threatening federal agents, imagine what he's been doing to civilians who can't fight back. Kelvin spoke up. We already know he has complaints on his record. 3 of them, all involving people of color. Harding's expression darkened. Then this is a pattern, and the department knew about it and did nothing. He picked up his phone again. I'm escalating this. This goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office. If Caldwell has been violating civil rights, he needs to face federal charges, not just departmental discipline. By the time Damon and Kelvin left Harding's office an hour later, the wheels were already in motion. The recording had been sent to the police department's Internal Affairs Division, to the city's legal department, and to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Formal complaints had been filed at every level, and the story was already starting to leak. By that evening, the local news had picked up the story. The headlines were blunt and damning. Rookie cop threatens FBI agents with taser after racially profiling them in park. Federal agents filed complaint after being accused of drug dealing while conducting operation. Recording captures officer saying, all that matters is you guys are black. The police department released a statement within hours calling the incident deeply concerning and promising a full investigation. But the statement didn't slow anything down. The public wanted answers, and they wanted them immediately. Officer Ryan Caldwell was placed on administrative leave the next morning. Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation that same day, and what they found made the situation even worse. Caldwell's personnel file showed 3 prior complaints over 8 months, all from Black and Latino residents, all claiming he had stopped them without cause, questioned them aggressively, and treated them like criminals. All 3 complaints had been noted by his training officers. All 3 had been documented, and all 3 had been dismissed without serious consequences. The pattern was undeniable, and the department had ignored it. Within a week, Caldwell was terminated. The official findings stated that he had engaged in racial profiling, made stops without probable cause, threatened federal agents, attempted to interfere with a federal investigation, and demonstrated a clear pattern of biased policing. He was 26 years old with 8 months of experience, and his law enforcement career was over. But the firing was just the beginning. The FBI didn't just file a complaint, they filed a federal lawsuit. Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles, represented by the FBI's legal team and a private civil rights attorney, sued Officer Ryan Caldwell and the city for violation of their civil rights, racial discrimination, unlawful detention, and attempted interference with a federal investigation. The lawsuit sought nearly $1 million in damages and demanded systemic reforms to prevent this from happening again. And because the case involved federal agents and a recorded admission of racial profiling, it became national news within days. Officer Ryan Caldwell's name was everywhere. His face was on every news site. And the recording of him saying, all that matters is you guys are black, was played on every broadcast. His career wasn't just over. His reputation was destroyed, and his name would be permanently tied to one of the most clear-cut examples of racial profiling ever caught on tape. The lawsuit filed by FBI Special Agents Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles moved through the legal system faster than most civil rights cases ever do. Primarily because the evidence was so overwhelming that the city's attorneys knew they had no chance of winning in court. The recording was clear, undeniable, and damning. Officer Ryan Caldwell's voice saying, "All that matters is you guys are black," played on news stations across the country for weeks, and no amount of legal maneuvering could make those words disappear. The city settled the lawsuit for $950,000 within 4 months. The settlement included not just monetary compensation, but a list of mandatory reforms that the FBI and the agent's legal team had demanded. The police department was required to implement comprehensive bias training for all officers, establish an independent civilian oversight board to review complaints of racial profiling, create new protocols requiring officers to document the specific probable cause for any stop or search, and conduct quarterly audits of BodyCam footage to identify patterns of discriminatory behavior before they escalated into federal incidents. Officer Ryan Caldwell's termination was swift and permanent. He was fired 3 weeks after the incident, and his law enforcement certification was revoked by the state. At 26 years old, after just 8 months on the job, his career in law enforcement was over. He tried to appeal the termination twice, and both appeals were denied. The evidence against him was too strong, the pattern too clear, and the public outrage too loud for any review board to justify giving him another chance. But Caldwell's firing wasn't the end of the story. The internal affairs investigation that followed his termination uncovered something even more troubling. When investigators reviewed the complaint records for the entire department, they found that Caldwell wasn't the only officer with a pattern of stops without probable cause targeting communities of color. 5 other officers had similar complaint histories. Multiple documented incidents, all involving Black and Latino residents, all claiming the same behavior. The department had the complaints on file. Supervisors had noted them, and nothing had been done to address the pattern until the FBI forced their hand. Those 5 officers were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. 2 of them were eventually terminated. 3 were reassigned to administrative duties and required to complete additional training before being allowed back on patrol. The department's failure to act on documented complaints became a central part of the FBI's case, and it was one of the main reasons the settlement amount was so high. The case became a landmark example used in law enforcement training programs across the country. The recording of Caldwell's interaction with Agents Wright and Miles is now played in police academies and civil rights workshops as a clear demonstration of what racial profiling looks like, how quickly bias can escalate into rights violations, and why patterns of complaints must be taken seriously before they result in federal lawsuits. Damon Wright and Kelvin Miles continued their work with the FBI. The undercover operation they were conducting at Riverside Park was completed successfully 2 weeks after the incident, and the intelligence they received into that bag led to the arrest of 11 individuals involved in an interstate drug trafficking network. Both agents received commendations for their work, and both have used their experience with Caldwell to advocate for better training and accountability in local law enforcement agencies that work alongside federal operations. Officer Ryan Caldwell's life after his termination has been difficult. He has not been able to find work in law enforcement anywhere in the country. Background checks always reveal the reason for his firing, and the viral recording ensures that his name is permanently associated with racial profiling. He attempted to work in private security, but was let go after 2 months when clients recognized his name and requested he be removed. He now works in retail for near minimum wage, and every job application he fills out requires him to explain why he was terminated from his previous position. 5 years later, the reforms implemented as part of the settlement are still in place. The Independent Oversight Board reviews every complaint of racial profiling, and officers with patterns of stops without probable cause are now flagged and required to undergo retraining or face suspension. BodyCam footage is audited quarterly, and supervisors are held accountable for failing to address documented complaints. The changes haven't eliminated racial profiling in the department, but they have created a system where officers like Ryan Caldwell can't operate unchecked for months while complaints pile up in their personnel files. The case also had a broader impact. The U.S. Attorney's Office used it as the foundation for a review of policing practices in the city, and the Department of Justice issued new guidance on preventing racial profiling in jurisdictions that receive federal funding. The settlement and the reforms that followed became a model that other cities pointed to when implementing their own accountability measures. The lesson was expensive and public. 2 federal agents sitting on a park bench should never be profiled, threatened, and nearly arrested for the color of their skin. A badge does not grant permission to ignore the Constitution, and patterns of racial profiling have consequences that go far beyond one officer's career. They cost cities millions of dollars, they destroy public trust, and they expose departments to federal oversight that could have been avoided if supervisors had acted on complaints the first time instead of waiting for the FBI to force their hand. If this story reminded you that racial profiling doesn't just harm civilians, it can threaten federal operations and cost cities millions, share it. What reforms do you think every police department needs to prevent officers from profiling people without consequence? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe two men should be able to sit on a bench without being treated like criminals, subscribe. We're not stopping these stories until accountability becomes the standard, not the exception. Asterisk.